Welcome back to the tomb, everyone. This is the Pharaoh, aka Ali, and for today's episode, it's called Working Socially. And I have a very important guest with me today, and I'll have her go ahead and introduce herself.
All right. Well, hello everyone. I am Malakia Scott. I am a licensed master social worker. And I currently work in the field of child welfare. But mostly focused on mental health for youth in the child welfare system.
Okay. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So the first question I have is for those out there, could you explain like what is social work and like why is it important?
That's a great question, especially because a lot of people don't know what social workers do. And if they've had any type of experience or have heard anything about a social worker, typically it goes to, oh, y'all take people's kids. And
Usually
that's
when they meet a social worker, it's not in the best of.
right,
Oh,
right. So for me, I typically like to, say social work is somewhat of an art, but a trained art. You definitely have to have, and I want to make sure I say this, the credentials to call yourself a social worker because it's one of those things for those that are in the field. We oftentimes um I'd want to say it's almost a lack of respect for the profession because a lot of people will call themselves social workers without having a degree, whether that's a bachelor's degree in social work, a master's, doctorate, licensed master social worker, or licensed clinical social worker. Um, and, social work is one of those things that it can literally be anywhere, from child welfare to hospice care to palliative care, all of those things in between, at a community level or federal level, whatever. But it's to me, it's definitely an art, and it's all about the quality of living for a person. What can you do to help this person live their best life? And that
mhm.
can look very different depending on what population you serve. And most of the time, we are serving those that are in marginalized communities, um, someone who would be considered a vulnerable person. But yeah, we do a lot. We do a lot.
And you said that one was a clinical social worker, and what was the other one?
The other one is a licensed master social worker. So that really is somewhat like an associate license before you get your full license in social work. And depending on what state you live in, the the terminology or the credentialing can change. Like for instance, in South Carolina, to be fully licensed, the term is a licensed independent social worker. And you can either have like a clinical practice or an advanced practice type. And here in Georgia, you can just be called a LCSW, a licensed clinical social worker. Um, and again, like I said, with the licensed master social work, you do have to take an exam for that, and you are basically supervised under a LCSW, someone who's fully licensed.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so you're supervised, and then I know because of Dharma doing her stuff is that you also have to have like a certain amount of hours to become a licensed social worker, correct?
Mm-hmm. You do. You definitely do. So when you're going for your full licensures, there's like 120 hours that you get for supervision. That can be, well, it has to be individual and group therapy. Individual and group supervision. Um, and both the LMSW and the LCSW require an examination that you have to take. And like, and really the difference is really, like I said, is the supervision level. Once you get your LCSW, you kind of can get more into doing more contracted work without so much oversight. So that's really, to me, that's only the real difference, really.
Okay, so one is you kind of working under someone, learning from them, and the other one is that you can go out, have your own practice, and then eventually be the person that someone else is working under.
Right,
Gotcha.
right, right,
Okay.
definitely.
And you said that with social workers that they deal with vulnerable populations. So what are some vulnerable populations that social workers would be working with?
Oh, so for, I can use my experience. So for me, I've worked with I've definitely worked with youth, and most of the time with youth, those were youth that had like some type of mental health concern or behavioral concern. Um, the other population I've worked with is those who were in their end of life. So you're talking about those who are dying. So that could be considered like your vulnerable population. I know a lot of other populations might consider, someone transitioning, from the prison system to now coming out back into the real world.
Mhm.
Or so it could be the elderly, it could be women, it could be minorities. um yeah, we got a lot we can work with, definitely a
Mhm.
lot we can work with.
And then that would probably involve people with I don't have to say the politically correct word, cognitive impairments. Is that
Mm-hmm.
that's the
Definitely.
politically correct word for it? I know it's changing.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, anything that's, you know, like I said, the good thing about being a social worker is, to me, is you can be cross trained. Like, you get to do your social work aspect where you're looking at the total person. You're talking about resources and services. But also on the flip side, if you're more into the clinical part, you really do get to dive into, like you said, the cognitive parts, the clinical piece of like really exploring. So, you go for social worker, then you get to do your therapy over here. And if you're not someone who's into want to do therapy, some people get their LCSW, or their full license in social work, to do more indirect practice. So you will see people at the administrative level, that might be overseeing programs or services in the community. So it can look very different, for a social worker. There's so many different, I guess, um I guess in Clark Atlanta terms, we would say change agent. You can go from advocating to educating to being a broker to linking people to services. So it varies, and I guess that's why it's so challenging for a lot of times for people to really understand what we do.
Gotcha. And
Hmm.
because that kind of sounds similar to like what I studied with public health, is that when people ask what exactly is public health, it's like, well, it's kind of just the health of the public, but there's so
Right.
many facets of like public health that you can get into. And the thing that I wanted to ask you is that with social work, it does it have like its own science, or does it kind of is it kind of like amalgamation of different sciences coming together, and then you're doing something with the information from those different fields?
Yeah, so most definitely we do study a lot of theory. Um, a lot of theories, or a lot of things that are evidence based practice that you can use, when you're working with your client. So for instance, I'm just going back to just social work school. So like Clark Atlanta, our approach was the Afrocentric perspective.
Hmm.
So, for us, we're totally looking at the person's environment, we're looking at their subjective experiences because, in the perspective, that's important. Emotions are important. The collective is important. So we draw from all of those things as well. And again, depending on what type of approach you kind of just gravitate towards, I just say, learn it,
Hmm.
perfect it, know as much as you can um about it. But yeah, I could definitely say it comes, and even for people who study psychology, some of the studying is the same. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, so a lot of that is kind of overlapping in some ways. But I think, with social work, we try to look at, like what we say, a biopsychosocial spiritual. We're looking at the whole person.
Okay, gotcha. And you said that you received your bachelor's in psychology. So, what made you decide to go into social work?
um for me, I think initially I always wanted to go into social work, but I think at the time when I was looking at schools and deciding what I wanted to major in, um, what I think at the time the school did not have a social work program. They had a human services program, but at that time it was only offered to what they call accelerated program for those that were working. And so I was like, no, so I decided the other route was psychology because I always, was interested in how the mind works, how people think, act, behave. So for me, I think that was a good foundation for me. And then after that, I was like, I still had that part of me also who wanted to advocate
Mhm.
for others. So I was like, okay, definitely going to get my social work degree now. Definitely.
And when you say advocating for others, so coming, I guess, from a public health standpoint, I think of like the people in hospitals, like the patient advocate. It's like,
Right.
would that person be like a social, like trained in social work, or like what does like advocacy and social work look like?
So when I think about that, as far as a person they might have in the hospital, they could very well have a degree in social work.
Mhm.
They could have some other degree in some other social science. Like I said, it could be sociology, it could be psychology, a human service degree. And typically, when I think of an advocate in social work, usually you are providing some type of emotional support, to the person that you're serving, but you're also helping them either navigate like complex systems,
Mhm.
or preparing them, to kind of, like I said, to kind of go through those complex systems. I'm trying to think of a good example that I can use where I've, really had to advocate for a patient. And maybe I can go back to like my hospice days where you might have in you might have a patient, that they still want to say go out to the grocery store. That might be something that they might not be able to do anymore. So what advocacy might look like in that aspect is coming back together with your team, whether that's the nurses, the doctor, it's the CNA, and just saying, hey, how can we come together and have this person just go to the grocery store and do their shopping so that they still feel a sense of independence, but we're still able to do that in a way that isn't going to disrupt the quality of living or cause them to have like maximum pain of like 10. You
Yes.
know, so it might look like something like that for a patient, say that's on hospice care, for a child working in therapy. um, it may be just be something as simple as, okay, I know this kid is in the classroom. Oftentimes they become disruptive. If you see XYZ happening, um, could you send them to me and we have a discussion, versus, okay, they're being disruptive, we're sending them straight to the, principal or
Hmm.
whomever, or going straight to
Like detention.
punishment, where we can just kind of redirect that energy. So it's kind of, advocating for accommodations, or something along the lines of that.
So you brought up the example of schools. So say if a kid is being disruptive and things like that, and it's like, um, because I know that boys, but then especially like black boys in particular, are disproportionately diagnosed with certain like behavioral problems and things like that. Would you be the intermediate before they go to like the school psychologist and get try to get evaluated for something, or do you like
Um,
do social workers have a role in that, from a child being deemed a problem to when they're actually diagnosed?
so for me, I come from a very, very small just town, so my experiences have been different. I know for me growing up, we did not have a school social worker. We only had a guidance counselor. So
Mhm.
any issue, they felt like a teacher could not handle, you would go to the guidance counselor. Now I'm seeing that now that I am a social worker, those things exist. You do have a social worker that are in the schools that might take on those situations. Now I think they're having more social workers come into the school who are working with youth who have, like, I guess what they would say, emotional disorders, to kind of work with them. But it just all, to me, I think it all depends on the relationship. Like if a teacher has, a whoever the teacher has that relationship with, that's probably going to be the first person they go to talk to about this student. And it may take everybody coming to the table to kind of consult about what should be done and who should be doing what. Because I know sometimes, you know and that's no fault of the teachers, because a lot of times we're working with kids. You want to make sure you're, saving yourself
Yeah.
too. Yeah. And you're being a mandated reporter. And sometimes we can get overzealous in reporting things that probably needed to have a discussion, before you go that route. Um, so, and I get it. The classroom management doing all of that, you just kind of like, okay, who can help me with this? So before you kind of get to the school psychologist thing, I think, you definitely have to have everybody come to the table to see if that's even the direction, you need to go. Cause it could be something as simple as this child just isn't sleeping.
Hmm.
And we know how it is if you sleep deprived.
Yes.
You get to school and you're asleep, and then now you're disruptive. So it may just
or
take a
or the
simple
child might
conversation.
not have, like, child might live in a food insecure home, so they come to
Right,
school like hungry, so
right,
they're not
right,
paying attention, they're off the walls. It's like because their body's freaking out because it hasn't eaten today.
right, right. So if you, and like I said, it just depends on if that school has a school social worker. Everybody might not have that, depending on if it's a rural area. Like I said, I grew up like that, and when I was doing therapy, I was contracted through the Department of Mental Health to go and be the school-based therapist. And they had had that in 15 years, anybody there. So what was happening was the kids were going to the nurse
Mm.
for almost like therapeutic stuff. So for the nurse, she was overwhelmed because she's like, I'm just supposed to be, providing nursing services, but now I've established this rapport with these kids and we need help. So we need somebody to kind of come and take on that other role. Now the guidance counselor still did handle a lot of the other things because like everything else, you have red tape, you have,
Hmm.
criterias that you have to meet to be able to go in and see the mental health therapist. So it just depends. It just depends.
So with coming from a coming from a school that didn't have a social worker, it's like, do you think that every public school should have a social worker designated to that school? And do you think that having a social worker there when you were growing up, like it would have been uh, there would have been like a noticeable benefit for the people there?
Yeah, I definitely think, that would be beneficial if most public schools had a social worker. Even if it's just for interpersonal skills and, development skills, just having somebody that might be able to have access or the knowledge of resources that are within the community. I think that would definitely be beneficial. And I think sometimes the job of a social worker can be very challenging because of the lack of resources.
Hmm.
So I still think it would be a benefit, though. I definitely do, just to have someone again to kind of talk you through those systems and why we might not have those resources. And how can we get those, and if not, where else can we go? So yeah, I think it would definitely have been beneficial for me as well because I mean, I don't know now in the school if it's still a big stigma to go talk to a social worker. I know us, me growing up, you didn't want to go to the guidance counselor,
Hmm.
but maybe some of the dynamics have changed in school and maybe not. It could be different. I hadn't been in the school system since maybe 2015. And I know some of the kids I worked with, they were very open, so that was different for me because I was expecting a lot of resistance. But I think in the social media era, more people are talking about mental health, and young kids are, showing signs really early of some type of mental illness. So I don't know if that has something to do with it. And maybe we are kind of breaking the stigma a little bit. I don't think it'll ever truly go away, though. I don't think it will.
And with that, you mean the stigma of like seeking help for mental health?
Yeah, and just seeking help in general.
Hmm.
I just think that's just human nature, like to be self-sufficient, in a westernized culture. I feel like we've taken it on. Whereas again, I'm going back to Clark Atlanta, our thing was we work as a collective. So help isn't seen as a bad thing. That's where you draw your strength from. Um, Versus, like I said, in the westernized culture, it's like you need to be doing it all on your own. And if you're not, then you're weak and you're, all of those things.
Yeah,
So it depends on the perspective.
and that's the thing is that I think, like you said, being in a westernized culture is that asking for help is seen as a deficiency in the person
Right.
versus like I'm asking for help because I see the asset in you, which
Exactly.
is a very like it's the same thing, but it's a how, like you said, perspective of how you look at it. It's like you're an asset. It's not that I'm deficient. It's that you're an asset.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I think my motto lately has been, strength requires support.
Hmm.
And I can say that just on my own journey with becoming a social worker, like I haven't gotten here on my own. There were people who directed me, guided me, taught with me experiences. So I know it's not by the strength of just me.
Yes. It's like
Yeah.
as much as people like to try to sell the story, it's like, oh, I got it out the mud myself. It's like no one does
Right.
anything by themselves.
No, somebody gave you an opportunity.
Yes.
Yeah, you've done the work, and that's great. I'm not dismissing that. I just, want us to be more realistic in knowing that there have been people before us that have helped us
Hmm.
and guided us. And I know sometimes it can, even people who discouraged you in some way were beneficial in
Yes.
some way. So yeah,
And
that's my take on
that's
it.
the thing is that, like you said, it's like someone gave you an opportunity. It's like someone opened the door. It was up to you to walk through it. That's where the hard work is. It's like, but
Right.
that door had to be open. It's like majority of the times you're not kicking that door in. It's like someone opened it first. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
but you said that you worked in hospice care.
Mhm.
What was that like? Because I imagine that that was probably hard seeing people like at like the end of their lives and trying to help that transition.
Yeah, so for me, it was, of course, when I first decided to say, "Hey, I'm going to do this," I was, of course, nervous because you want to do right, and this is such a sensitive time for that person in their life, but also their family. So beginning that, it was almost like it was having awkward conversations, then it went into the whole mechanical part, and then it just became natural, where you were able to have those, I guess you could say, hard or crucial conversations around death. And for me, I know a lot of people be like, "Wow, how did you do that?" Or "I don't think I would be able to do that." I said some of those things, but I did it, and it was the help of others training me, walking me through it. It was also just doing a lot of just studying and just being present with that person. I think I learned that silence was okay. Like, you
Hmm.
don't have to always be talking. You can just be there to be a listening ear. The biggest part of being a hospice social worker, I think, was just one, recognizing the signs and symptoms of a person, like where they're declining more, when they're, uncomfortable. How do we make them comfortable? Because that's really the primary part, is comfort at this point. It's not about save I don't want to, I guess you could say it's not about prolonging life any
Hmm.
longer, but it's not also like we're rushing that process either. It's more about comfort to that person, and comfort can look different,
Hmm.
for everyone.
It's about
Um
increasing the quality of the life that they do have, not the
right.
quantity at that point. Yes.
Exactly. And so for me, I think it was just learning for each person what that looked like for them, and what my role was going to be. And typically, we think we go in and we're, guiding these people, and honestly, the client is guiding you on what they need from you. The families also, you do get attached to the people that you're working with, because you see them so often. You have some hard conversations, like For instance, do not resuscitate. That was probably the scariest conversation for me to have, but then I had to try to flip it and say, well, this person is dying. That's
Hmm.
scary. So me coming out and saying to them, hey, you know, you still have this choice in the matter, but I just want to be honest with you what do not resuscitate looks like, what it can look like for your family. And I may ask you that question at every visit or every other visit. Um, what are your arrangements? Um, because at this point, we know if you're coming on to hospice, usually it's because you're meeting some type of medical criteria of you have 6 months or less to live. Now, that's not to say that a lot of people that came onto those services um, would live less than 6 months. Some people be on there a year, 2 years,
Hmm.
just because they came off all those medications and now they're just comfortable,
Yeah.
so they would live a lot longer. Um, but yeah, I think for me, I learned a lot. Some parts of it I think I really enjoyed was just getting to see the physician's piece of it, the nursing part, how the CNAs took care of the patient. It was interesting. It was definitely an interesting experience.
And with that experience, did that kind of change your perspective on how like you view how you view death? Because I feel like with working with that is that it definitely can change like how someone can approach it.
Right, right. Yeah, it did. It definitely did. For me, I think s- it in my mind, it made me think about how simple things matter.
Hmm.
Like being able to get out the bed and use the bathroom, or eat the food that you like, or drive your car. Like it really made me think like, wow, the simple things that I do every day for somebody else has now become where they're fully dependent on somebody else to do those things for themselves. And even to watch people transition, um it was it was like, wow, like to see that, um to the textbook part of it, to actually see it happening is different when you're in it.
Hmm.
And and I think I got to kind of be on the other side and got to be the patient, well, got to be the client, in the sense of the family member who was also, which is kind of crazy that I had a dual role where I was a family member but also the patient social worker. So that was interesting, um to do that in small areas. Sometimes you kind of end up doing those things. But I got to feel what the family was feeling. And that was different. So my approach in some ways did change. Sometimes, like I said, it would just be, I'm just going here really just to sit with the person, and we might not even have a conversation. We're just
Hmm.
sitting here. Or today I gotta have a really hard conversation.
And with learning some of that stuff, some of those things, is that did that kind of spark you having a conversation with your family about like what are the things that they want to happen in the arrangements like when they do transition?
Yeah, it does. It does make you have those conversations, like advanced directives. Like, do you want all those life-saving measures or do you not? Um, what is that going to look like for you? It does. It definitely makes you say, I need to be prepared. And do you have life insurance? Having those conversations, because we know a lot of people don't, and then you have to resort to other ways to get your loved ones, the ceremony, well, the homegoing service that you would like, or you would think they would like. And then another thing was just, for some of these families, they never had those conversations. So now you're at the end of the life of that person, and they're having to choose other methods that they never thought, like body donation,
Mm.
because now financially we it's going to be more of a stressor on the family. So it definitely opened up, like there's options out there, but is this the best option for this family at this time?
Yes, and it's definitely hard to have those conversations because, uh, especially in this society, death is something that people just, we all know it's coming, but no one wants to talk about it, and
Right.
we usually don't have that conversation until it happens, and then it's like, well, what did your mother want, like, to happen?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I don't know, I never asked her that. Like,
Right.
I
Right.
ended up sitting down and having a conversation with my parents, and I just asked them straight up. It's like, when you guys kick the bucket transition, it's like, what do you want to happen? And
Right.
I know what they want. Well, I'm still trying to figure out what my dad wants. First time I asked him, he told me just to dig a ditch and throw him in it. I was like, I don't think that's legal.
No,
Um,
gotta kind of get some. Yeah, we gotta talk to some people about
yeah, he was just like, just pick a plot in the backyard and just put me there. It's just like,
that.
I mean, if it's legal, I mean, I don't know the legality of it. Probably the way that this country tries to make money off of everything, it's probably
Right.
legal to do that.
I've known
Um,
some people who've done it, but they definitely had to go through some, hoops to be able to do that.
to
But
and that's wild to, like, if you own, like,
yeah.
if you have your own house, it's your own property. It's just like, so someone who's lived here for maybe 20 years and they want to be buried on their own property, I have to get your permission to do that. It's
Mm-hmm.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
It's wild. It's wild. And that's what I said, and that's what really opened my mind to, like, wow, it's so much that goes into this hospice social work life. The arrangement, but not even just, after the arrangement, it was the bereavement part. It was the grief counseling. It was, a person has gone 6 months handling affairs, and then all of a sudden they have, I guess, in a way, like this, like, oh my goodness, this person is really gone, but it's because they've been caught up in the arrangement part. And so now it's like they're grieving the person all over again. And I think with the grieving process too, it never stops. And
mhm.
it does, and it's not linear either. It's not, a person can be in denial for a long time, and then you might see some depression, and then they might accept it one day, and then they're back at shock and denial. It just depends on the person.
It's a cycle.
Right.
Sometimes, yes.
Right.
And so, with, like you said, is that there are some people that when they would come into hospice, they would actually live longer than the 6 months, and then there are some that would live less than that 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in your from your experience, do you think that, like, the longer someone was there, it's like, did it help give the family more time to kind of, not well, I guess, kind of accept that the person, like, it wasn't that much of a shock as much.
I think it did help. Um, in some ways, like I said, when you're thinking about the arrangement piece of it, they were willing to work on things, and then you had some families who were still like dragging their feet,
Mhm.
like, I really don't, I really don't want to have this conversation. Um it but I think, like you said, it did give them comfortable in the ideal of having their loved one on hospice services, because now they were seeing the benefit of not taking them to several doctor's appointments and having them on a lot of medication, and now we're in the hospital for 2 weeks, and now we're back here at home. So they seen the benefit in that, and like again, seen some of them just kind of do better, just being at home. But I think it did help with having those conversations, and then for others, it kind of prolonged the
Mhm.
process. I know I've had families that I would have an individual almost 2 years, and I had been seeing this family for a very long time, and it would be like every 3 months I'd try to have that conversation with them, and it was still like nothing. Or yeah, we're gonna do this, yeah, we've done it. And it literally took to the very end for us to finally have something concrete that we can go off of, because at that moment when that person has transitioned, to me nothing else matters. What you've done, that point at death is what people are going to remember.
Mhm.
So I try to say that a lot, like, let's prepare, because when we get to that moment, you're not going to be thinking about everything the nurses and doctors have done. You're in this moment. So it's walking them through it.
And with, I guess with them postponing it, is that would be a sense of kind of denial, because once you start signing the paperwork, it's like, oh, this is actually
Right.
real.
Right. It's really real. And a lot of it too, just in, hospice where it would be like, oh, they're experiencing anticipatory grief. They're anticipating this happening, where they're anxious, where they're, kind of closed off, not really, coming to a place of acceptance. And we expect that. We definitely expect that, with the families, particularly, you know, with Black families, it was almost like we're not having this conversation around the person that's sick. If we do, it was like I had to step out, step outside and have that conversation, or it was almost this, um, a miracle's going to happen, and it was almost like, okay, we really got to have this crucial conversation that this is the prognosis, this is what we're seeing, and we had to go with the facts, and that can be hard, um, when you're kind of now challenging, in I guess in this case, somebody's spiritual beliefs,
Yes.
because they're like, no, that's not what I believe. But it's like we're trying to also give you the facts of what's happening. Like, literally, the person's no longer eating, they're sleeping a lot, they're no longer taking in any fluids. And I get it, it's your coping mechanism. I got that, but I also wanted to make sure I prepare you as much as possible.
And that's, yes, and that's like just giving them the like the information that they need. It's like they
Mm-hmm.
might not accept it at that moment, but
Right.
it's like they have the information so that when they do need it, it's not as if they've gotten to a place and now they're just like, well, I don't have any information. Like you've given it to them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know if you can give any particulars because don't know the legality of it, but have there ever been any like wild funeral arrangements that like you've helped people?
I'm trying to think if I've had any. Whoo, like, let me think about this, because I know it's been so many situations where I'm like, oh my goodness. Um, I've definitely been asked to speak about the patient at funerals, or, homegoing services. That wasn't uncommon for a family member to ask that. I think some of, for me, the one that was hard for me to kind of reconcile my feelings on was it was a situation where they did have to end up doing a body donation. Um, and the family member had shared her story about the loved one, and um, there had been some abuse, like a lot of abuse. And of course, for me, I'm like, if somebody did all this abuse, to me, this is me not being a social worker. This is me just being a person. Like, I don't think I would be taking out this loan and that loan to bury this said person. It's kind of like, you're not in the best financial situation right now. You have children. This person has abused you for years, and you're taking care of them. So you got to kind of step outside your own and say maybe they've reconciled some feelings that I can't do anything about,
Yes.
and the only thing I can do is give them the options. Like, hey, if you do decide that you still want to get this loan and cremate them or whatever, that's your choice. I'm just giving you the information. Also giving you this body donation information if you decide that financially is a strain. um, and initially, that person made the decision to do the body donation. And when I had gotten there, what was shocking is that she had filled out everything. So, even when you think somebody's going to do something else, they turn around and do what you would hope they would have done. And she had completed everything and seemed to be fine. So it can always go either way. You never know what'll happen at that time of death with families. Um, you think the family that you prepared for is going to be fine, and they're the family that have the funeral home people sitting there for 2-3 hours. It just depends on the family.
Yeah, and then you can also have some people that just start acting a fool.
Yeah,
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 I've had
yeah,
I've had that. I mean, from the medication piece, like when a person has transition, the nurses do give a protocol on how to, you know, get rid of the medications and to do that in a safe manner. And I mean, I've had family members calling about that, about people have stolen the medication. Craziness, just crazy things that you would think at that time you wouldn't be dealing with, but you are. Um, and it's like, no, we tell you how to discard of those things. And people do what they will with it. And if you know that there's a family that has a history of substance abuse, we kind of do a little bit more educating and oversight. Because yeah, we don't need that either.
yeah, yeah. We don't definitely don't need that.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, well, let's hop out of the Hopsis hole.
yeah.
Uh, so through social work, like I guess, what is something that has helped you in your personal life that like you have taken from social work? Like I know that we talked about like with hospice and having those conversations, those tough conversations with your family members, but just wondering about like what are some other things that have helped you by being a social worker in your personal life?
Let's see. So, like I said, crucial conversations. I would guess for me is to it's kind of step outside of having to social work things and have fun, because this work can consume every part of your, like you said, your life. And I will say, like, the skills are great to have because everybody needs interpersonal skills. Everybody needs that. Um, but I think just being a social worker, it also makes me look at myself and say, I have to look at myself in totality as well. And just because I'm aware of things doesn't mean that I'm not immune to things happening to me, um or that I'm immune to not messing up, because you can always be aware and not have mastered something. So I think for me that's that's probably what I've learned the most is you can have all this knowledge and just not have mastered it yet. You can be somewhere in the middle getting there. And what self actualization looks like is different for everybody. And do you truly get there? And what does that look like for you? So yeah, I feel like social work leaves you with a lot of questions too. And when you think you've answered it, you have another question.
Yeah, you find another one, and that's the
Yeah, you
thing.
find another one. And then it's like at that point, you either say, I accept the answer that I have, or I don't know, and I'm okay with that.
And that's one of the hardest things is that for people to say, especially I've noticed it, especially amongst educated people, is just to say the three words "I don't know," and
Right.
because I guess sometimes we feel like because we have this education, it's like we're supposed to know. But then again, it's like we are humans. So even
Hmm.
even if you have the answers, like you said, even if you have like the tools and the training, it's like you're not immune to the cycle of grief. You're not immune to that. We're all
Right.
like we're human. You might be able to have an understanding and maybe a weird type of outer body experience. It's like I know I'm in the bargaining stage right now. It's like I like this is
Right.
what I know. It doesn't change that I'm in it, but at least I know where I am. And
Exactly.
that's and it's like they say is that like doctors, people who are doctors are the worst patients because they're always
They
trying
are.
to diagnose us.
They
Like,
are.
well, I don't agree with that. It's like I understand you're a doctor, but you're a patient right now. So,
Hmm.
and
Yes,
that's and
you're a
that's definitely
patient
one of the
right now.
hardest things.
Yes, I worked with a doctor. I seen it all the time. He was woo. It was like he's preached self-care, self-preservation all the time, and he was doing none of that. So yeah, none of that.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But we all do it. I know as a social worker, I've done it. I think the only thing that I really feel like I've been consistent with is if I was going to be a great therapist, was having a therapist. So I do good with that part. But then you have to take a step forward and make sure you're also implementing what you're learning and doing those things. So and we all get off track and for whatever reason. Sometimes we don't even have a reason. It's just because it's subconsciously in you.
Yeah, it's like I
You
just
just
want to
do it.
do it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can say definitely well, for me, and definitely going to get some backlash for this one. But uh, as you know, like I work with like food deserts, food insecurity, like proper diets, fresh fruits and vegetables, and there are times where I do not adhere to that. It's like, and I know it. It's like, oh, it's like I know I should not be eating this right now. It's like, but it's just so good.
Right.
And like
Exactly.
also understanding the working out part. And I guess for me, I've come to a place where it has given me a better understanding because I can say to someone, it's like, these are the things you need to do to be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm trying to do it so I understand how hard it can be. It's like, so
Right.
don't expect from me don't expect me saying to you, you'll be able to change this overnight. It's like, because I've learned this, I've got a master's in it, and I'm still trying to like implement.
Exactly.
So it's about kind
Exactly.
of making the humanistic connection with people. It's just like, this is the facts, but I understand how hard it is to actually do these things. Like, so as long as you're working towards it and your goal is to get there, it's like, then I can't tell you how fast to get there. Like
Right.
I tell my friends all the time, it's like no one tells a snake when to shed its skin. A snake sheds its skin when it's ready.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. That's a good example. We I know we do that all the time. We do. We do it, and it's one of those things, like I said, we can have all of this knowledge and still not utilize it all the time. But I think that also, um, like you said, just goes back to understanding that we're human too. And yeah, we're not gonna always do, the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes we do enough, and enough is enough sometimes.
It's like I'm doing the best that I can right now.
Right.
Right
Right
now.
now, exactly.
And it's about for me, it's about giving people, first of all, the information, but then also addressing like their beliefs and attitudes about things. Because
Exactly.
I can say within my field is that one of the common misconceptions, well, I think is a misconception, is that they think that if you just give someone information, they're going to change their behavior. It's like you can give someone as
Right.
much information as you want, but if you haven't addressed their beliefs about like said behavior, then it does not matter how much
Right.
information you give them because their beliefs are going to override the information that you gave them. So my thing is like
Exactly.
addressing people's beliefs because I've met some sentiments where it's like, oh, like maybe doing like vegetarian like 2 times out of the week, and I've had some black people tell me, I was like, that's what white people do. It's like, that's healthy eating. You're supposed to have that too. What makes you think you can't be healthy?
Right. And you're right. You have to address the beliefs. You definitely do. That's shoot for my CBT people out there. That's what we do. We look at your thoughts. We examine those thoughts. Where do they come from? The source of that. Um, and I think you pointed out something too. Just made me think about, as a social worker, what I learned is you have to be big on autonomy. People are going to make their decisions, um, and no matter how supportive you may be, people are going to make their own decisions, and you have to be okay with that. Um, Even these kids in care, they have rights. They do. And
That's
it's
what I'm trying to tell to black parents. That's my
right,
kid. What rights do my like? They're my
right,
kid.
exactly,
Like, no,
exactly,
like they are protected underneath the law. Nah, they're protected under this house.
right. Exactly. Like, no. Got a different law here. But yeah, even for those kids, they have rights, and you have to be willing to hear them out too. Even if you can see, oh, this might not be good if you go this direction. But yeah, I think autonomy is the hardest thing for us as humans to allow people to have. And yeah,
and
that's pretty
and
much
especially I guess in our professions is because like it's centered on helping people and trying to get like
right.
the best outcomes for people. So it's hard to look at someone you've tried everything that you can, and then they're just like, "Nah, I'm still gonna keep smoking cigarettes." And it's like, but but why?
Right,
And and the
right,
answer is sometimes
right.
because I want to,
Because
and
I
you
want to. Yeah.
can't do
Trust
anything.
me, I've seen it. Patients that, in care, they will say, they have COPD and still smoking cigarettes, and I just say, well, if that's your choice, just don't do it around your oxygen. Like that's all I can ask of you. Safety, and pretty much that's it. At that
Like
point,
if
if
you
they've
want to kill
done it,
yourself, just don't blow me up while you like while I'm here.
thank you. Don't blow me up. Or don't do it while I'm here. You
Yeah.
know, really just those things, because I think again we go back to beliefs. Is to that person, they have accepted, this is what is going to take me out, and I'm already at this stage, I might as well enjoy it. That's typically the mindset. And I'm like, well, and for them, that is their quality of life and living.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it's hard to,
yeah.
and you're not trying to tell like, and that's what I've learned through like through just interaction with people is that even though you care, like you can care for someone so much, and it's like you want them to see, like you do not have the authority to tell them how to live their lives. It's like you can give suggestions, you can give information, and address some of their beliefs, but at the end of the day, it is their choice.
Mm-hmm.
And like kind of talking about beliefs is that I'm pretty sure it's like within social work, especially with working with like youth and like the therapy and the mental health is that um, probably challenging the beliefs like within the black community is like, oh, mental health, like therapy is for crazy people and
Yep.
mental health is like a white person thing. Like we don't have the
Uh-huh.
luxury of having mental health.
Right. And why I gotta go talk to somebody when I could just talk to my friends? Your friends are not trained. That's why.
Yes.
Your friends aren't trained. I think and I think it's because it's again beliefs and attitude that um you don't understand that a therapist, you do planning, you do case planning, you do therapy notes, you do progress notes. So there's action steps that goes into this. And I think because if you're on the other side of it, you're not going to understand that. And I get it. I always say if you don't talk to anybody, you do want to talk to a trusted person. But if you do have that opportunity to talk to somebody on the other side, do that, even if it's just one time, um because it can be something very simple, like you go through life transitions. Sometimes you need somebody there to kind of help you process that. It might just be able to process that, and for nothing else. So I just say give it one shot. And if not, hey, you did it.
Yes, because there are because like you said is that sometimes people are just like, well, why can't I just talk to my friends? Like you said, your friends aren't trained. Even
Hmm.
if you have like a trusted friend, maybe this is just the bias of me because
Exactly.
normally I'm the trusted friend. It's like if you have someone that you always go to, and it's like at some point go to them and just check on them. It's like
Right.
because if they're a trusted person for you, you don't know how many other people they're that trusted person for. Um,
Exactly.
because definitely and I'm not saying it's a bad thing because I love helping people,
Right.
but it's it sometimes can be a lot for your trusted friend.
Hmm.
Um,
It definitely can be. It
and
definitely can be.
it's probably doesn't help that I've read a lot of psychology books and things like that. So I do give them a level of planning. I was like, all right, you guys might need to start paying me 65 an hour.
Right. 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 Like you have to start paying me for this.
Either 65 or bring me a six pack. One of those. So bring me
What
something.
something,
Yeah.
something. I need to get compensated for this. Yes, I
And
I get it.
it's also hard because if it's not the trusted person, then sometimes people will just go to their pastor or
Hmm.
their imam or their rabbi, and
Right.
there might be like that person can give you guidance from a religious sense, and there
Hmm.
might be nothing wrong with that. But if you really believe or feel as though you're dealing with um mental health issue, or like your mental health is declining, is that unless you're pastor, it's also a therapist that has been trained. Like you should, like you said, go once. And
Right.
I would definitely I would definitely advise people to do some background on the
Right.
therapist that you're going to first, like because there might be um, you might be going to a therapist that really wants to help, but there might be that if that person is not culturally competent, then
Mm-hmm.
you might be talking to them. They're just like, oh wow, that's wild. Like if you give a story of your childhood and they're like, that's a that's abuse. It's like nah, like that was just a whooping. It's like that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like, but it's, and I guess maybe within the black community we do need to talk about what's like a whooping, beating, and discipline. It's like
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
some of it is borderline abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Trust me, I see that a lot in child, child welfare. So yeah, it we do you do have to have that type of conversation. I'm glad that you said, do your background check on the therapist. Ask those questions. Um, ask yourself what is your goal, for going into this. And you may not know. You may not know. Um, but even if it's just to go in there and ask, how does this work? Um, do that. But I just say, like I said, try it once, and if not, that's cool. You know. But I'm gonna probably always advocate for at least, having some type of trained professional in your circle, your life, to kind of help you, just transition through different things in life. Because again, I'm all about, everybody needs somebody, you know we do.
100%.
Yeah.
And so I guess one question I'd ask about therapy is do you think that there gets to a point where just someone's been going for a certain amount of time and they just really don't need it anymore? And do you think that when people start depending on, I guess, depending on the reason why they're going, should they have like also like an exit plan of like,
Mm,
I'm going to go for a certain amount of time, and with that, I guess they put more effort into their sessions because it's like I have 5 more sessions left. Like I need to
right.
actually like hook, like
Right.
buckle down.
So if you work for, the state, like working at South Carolina Department of Mental Health, you had to submit basically justification for still treating someone. And I'll go back to school of social work days. It was like, termination of a client starts at the assessment. So you're already thinking about, you know, discharge planning, what that's going to look like. And if a person is continuing um, therapy, what you may see is, can we reduce their number of sessions? Where if they're coming twice a week, it might be once a week. And when they're making some progress, then it's like, hey, I might only need to see you 3 times out of the month. So you're looking to reduce that so that they're able to use the skills that they're learning, and be able to utilize. That's not to say that they gotta, just quit, therapy all alone. But some people do get in it, and the therapist becomes almost more like their companion, and it's no longer that client therapist relationship. And you, as the therapist, do have to be responsible for recognizing when that's happening. And when that's happening, you, again, your exit plan. Okay, so now that we've done these sessions, can I refer you to a support group? Or do you need a life coach that you just need to check in with periodically? So yeah.
And that's that's very interesting because that makes it, that definitely conceptualizes it for me, because I think I see some of my friends that do go to therapy is that it's to the point where it's kind of like they're dependent on,
Mm-hmm.
like not in, like not independent. It's like I kind of feel like with therapy is that it's like you said, giving you the skills and the tools to deal with this. Is like, so if you're going for tools, it's like, then take those tools and then keep going. It's like if you run into a rough patch again, no one's saying that you can't go back.
Right.
And I think that's the thing when people think about therapy. It's like they're gonna fix all my problems for the rest of my life.
Right.
Like, no, problems pop
No.
up in life, like throughout your life. Like, so it might have
Exactly.
helped you with all the problems leading up to this, so that you can like move forward. But if a different type of problem pops up, you might have to go back.
Exactly. You might have to go back, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. Like you said, you just don't want to get to the point where, again, you as a therapist is now you more of this person's friend than actually, treating them. And that can be hard when you get to know people. So you have to make sure you as the therapist are still having your supervision and you're having those conversations to make sure, like, okay, am I doing some transference things, and let me back up. So yeah, you definitely have to be careful of that, and we've seen it happen. And I think, like, again, working with the Department of Mental Health at that time, um like you said, you had to justify why you were treating a person and get authorization for that. And that was kind of the reasoning for that, because they had seen so many people in therapy for years, and like, well, are they making any progress? And you don't want to get, like, for instance, putting kids in psychiatric facilities, and because people think in their mind we are still in the days where you just put some person away. No, we're now in a community based approach. Every service that you need, you should be able to find in your community. That's the idea now. Now we know that a lot of times that's not the case, but that's the idea.
Not the case for certain communities.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So I think you kind of touched upon it in the beginning when you said that most of the time when people have interaction with social workers, like, it's they have like a negative connotation. So I guess one I want to ask you, like, in your opinion, what is like the biggest misconception about social work?
I think the biggest misconception is that everybody can call themselves a social worker. That's one for sure. And I guess the other one, I'm trying to think if there's a another one. And then maybe I said everybody can call themselves a social worker because I've been dealing with that a lot lately in my field, because a lot of people are working in social services. So you are a helping professional. Um, but I think that's probably the biggest misconception, in that people just don't know what we do. And if we do, then everybody works in child welfare. Everybody work in child welfare. And some people know nothing about child welfare. I was one of them until I got in it. So yeah. And just that, anybody who comes to your house is a social worker. People think that. And it can be, I don't know, it could be the nurse practitioner coming, and people think that it was my social worker or a caseworker.
Mm, yes. With that though, it's like when you do social workers make a lot of home visits, or it really depends on where you're
Hmm.
working. So
Yeah, it depends on where you're working. Like pre-COVID, yeah, we were doing a lot of in-home visit. Thankfully for me, um, I was transitioning out of the direct care. I'm doing more indirect care training, um, for those who are serving the youth. But yeah, hospice, I was definitely in the homes. In the school system, I would see an increase in going to the homes during the summertime, because now the kids no longer in school, so you got parents working. So now I'm having to go to the home to do therapy services. But it definitely depends on what side of it that you're doing. Um, Now we do have a lot of telemental health. You do it online therapy. Um, for people who are doing community-based therapy, you're still going to be going to the homes. You're just going to probably have to exercise more caution now, um, depending on where you go. But yeah, and a lot of, I'm gonna be honest, a lot of social workers, we do that for a long time, and then we're like, okay, this has been enough, because it can begin to be taxing on you. So yeah, and you start to kind of get away from that a little
That's when you
bit.
go into training, and then you train the people who are like, fuck that, you go out there. I going out there.
Yeah, I'm like, I've done my due diligence. I paid my dues. You start to feel like that. And I definitely don't think that's a bad thing, because if you're starting to feel burned out, or start to feel like you're no longer as compassionate, or experiencing compassion fatigue, you do need to kind of switch it up a little bit. Um, but I think it's good to have that under your belt, though, definitely, because you don't want to be so far removed from working with people that you can't work with people, and you can't understand where they're coming from either. So, but yeah, if I don't have to do a home visit, I will not. But if it calls for that, I'll also do it too. So yeah.
Okay. Um, I just have two more questions for you, then I'll let you go. Uh,
Okay.
so I know that you said that with the pandemic, you stopped doing with the uh, stopped doing home visits. So like that was in the midst of a public health crisis. Social work was still going on.
Hmm.
Do you think that there's an overlap between like public health and social work?
I definitely think that now, and it probably always has been, especially if you've had to work with any type of interdisciplinary team, as a social worker, or even someone working, like you said, in public health. Uh, so I think we recently had a conversation about, with case managers having to go into the home, or should you disclose whether or not you've had the vaccine? Is this information that you need to be sharing with the families that you're serving? So I think now we are kind of getting into that public health, and we're also getting into whether the beliefs of whether the person you're serving believes that. So I do think it overlaps, um in some ways, definitely, for sure. Even working with our psychiatrist at the state office, just listening to her and what her recommendations might be for medication. She's looking at those things. What are the public health experts saying, about this? So it definitely overlaps, definitely.
Okay, because I know that you said that you do a lot with like mental health, and definitely within the public health like realm, people are starting to put more money towards mental health in the sphere of public health, and in means of just first of all find out the prevalence, the incidence, like what are the social and environmental factors that go into it. It's like how if someone lives in a community where there's a lot of like just concrete, like there's not that much green, it's like that affects
Hmm.
their mental health. And just understanding that, knowing that okay, we're gonna need more mental health services and social services here. It's like because people are more likely to be dealing with that. So I'm just kind of
Hmm.
like, and also speaking with Dharma, just talking about social work, I was like, that's a lot of stuff that we deal with in like in
Yeah.
public health. It was like, so it's like we're not so far apart as we think.
We're not. We're not. And I know they say mental health now is a public health crisis, and it is, especially now. I think it's just more so being talked about because of the pandemic. I mean, even just working at the state office, we did see an increase in kids going to psychiatric facilities. I mean,
Mhm.
you're talking about losing social interactions, going to school, and kids who already have some extreme things going on. Now you're taking away something that was pretty much like a coping skill for them. What do we do? And now you got to do stuff virtually, and some kids don't do well with that. Yeah, that's a crisis. Yeah, yeah, it is.
I feel like when they announce like, oh, like mental health is a crisis, social workers is like, yeah, we know. Like we've
Right.
been doing this.
We've been doing this. Yeah, and then we're like, now as social workers, like, we need help. We do.
Hmm.
And it's always been that way. Just even when we're talking about just, not even just the pandemic, but we talking about police brutality. We're talking about all of this. Like, we're dealing with those things all the time. So to have to see it on TV and hear it all the time, we definitely have to take our step back and debrief, because it's like, okay, we're in it, we're dealing with it. So yeah, we need some help too. The social worker need a social worker.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And like you said, it's like it's hard to just ask for that help because it's like I'm the social worker. Why am I asking another social worker? It's like because, like you said, it's like there's strength in someone helping, like lifting you up and helping you. It's like so, and we
right,
as African people, we've always have it's in us to operate as a community, and just we just need to get back to that.
right. Definitely, definitely. And I think we do it more often than we realize. And I just kind of want us to be mindful of that. Like, we do it. It just, a lot of times we get kind of distracted by what other people are saying we aren't doing, but I think we do it more than we realize.
Yeah, and I'm just personally, I'm just a person that's never satisfied, so I'm always just like
We
we
can
can
do
do it
more.
better. We can
Right.
do it
We
better.
can't, and I definitely think there's room for improvement. Definitely. Definitely. Um, but I will say, I'm like, we do it. It just may not look like how other people think it needs to look. So yeah.
It's like we're dancing to our own beats. So
Yeah.
yeah.
We are. We are.
So I wanted to ask you, like, what advice would you give to people who are going into or thinking about going into social work?
Um, so two things. The first thing is, with social work, you want to make sure you get your licensures. That is going to be so important, because now when you're looking for a job in social work, now that's all you're going to see: LMSW or LCSW or some type of full licensures. Um, just knowing that, make that a goal of yours. If you're wanting to experience, I guess you could say, if you wanted to be paid more, you need to be looking at licensures. Um, and then I guess the what would be the second thing? Just knowing, as a anytime you work in social work, just understanding that every system you work in has a system within a system, and learning to navigate that, it can be frustrating. um so just know, no matter what population you serve, there's going to be some type of system that has some red tape that's frustrating. Um but just keeping that in mind, and just trying to draw from some strengths, like some strength based places, like, what can I do if I can't do XYZ? And I think that's something I've had to come to terms with, just being, I guess, at this level, like a consultant. But it's like, oh man, like, there's some things I may not be able to solve, but what else can I do? Um and again, it's about accepting that. Because we know a lot of things don't happen overnight.
Yes. So I guess, do you have any closing statements? And then I also want you to go ahead and promote anything that is coming up, anything that you're doing. I know. So the time that we're taping this right now, this is June, and I know that you're doing something with mental health. By the time that this airs, it's going to be July. Yeah,
Okay.
July.
Okay. So, I guess just really any final words, like I said, it's just, if you're in the helping profession, whatever your self-care plan is, make sure you're intentional about it and do it. Even if that's just sitting down for 5 minutes and just taking some deep breaths. Now, I'm big on doing grounding exercises, whether that's just putting my feet in the grass or just getting some sunlight, something, do something that is going to help you uh feel a little bit better or be able to get through your day. That for me personally, that's what I would leave you all with. And as far as let's see. So right now, my focus was on just Black men just really talking about what mental health looks like for them. So in the calendar, the month of June was dedicated to Black men and just talking about what depression can look like in Black men. So if you're interested in seeing more content, centered around mental health and personal development, you can find that information on IG at Silence Speaks Back. And I also have a Facebook page just under the name of Silence Speaks. So yeah, check it out. If you interested in any of the content.
Okay. Well, I want to go ahead and say thank you for coming, and it was truly eye opening and very educational.
Well, you're welcome. I appreciate you asking me because I was like, oh, what I done got myself into. But no, this was cool. Like the conversation flowed, really well, and it's just good to know that people are interested in hearing from social workers and hearing what we do, and really just getting to understand it. So I do appreciate that.
Of course. And everyone, that has been another episode of Tomb Talks with the Pharaoh, and I'll see you guys next week.